Welcome to Venture Node. We are a Web3 community of founders who are looking to learn from each other by speaking to people who are currently in the trenches of their own venture. My name is Adrian. I have a background in fintech and have become more involved in the technical side of crypto over the past couple of years. I started this podcast in order to fill the gap in early stage project exposure and learn from some really amazing founders. Join us today with our guests coming from H2O Data. Before we get into the episode, I would like to give a special thanks to Killanova Ventures for making this episode possible and connecting us with today's guests. Let's get started with some introductions.
Yeah, for sure. So, Adrian, first of all, thanks for having me, and of course, Marek. So I go by Okarin, and I'm basically the business lead of the project of H2O. I come from a very traditional background where I actually worked a little under a decade into traditional finance, banking, insurances, and such, where I pretty much oversaw like operations, digitalization, automation, and strategy overall. Because I quickly realized how much data was undervalued as an asset, and I became a very strong advocate of just that. Actually, funny story, but I was throughout the years a very strong advocate of valuing data correctly and really treating it as an asset. So that, I mean, nowadays it seems obvious, but if we go back a decade, it wasn't that clear back then. So yeah, there I worked for quite a long time. I also was highly involved in the innovation part of the company, and I also founded the local blockchain initiative, let's say. But now recently, I actually decided to make the jump of faith and go fully into Web3 and commit full time with H2O actually. But it didn't really start there. So I've been really involved into blockchain for the past 5-6 years more in the traditional way as an let's say investor or whatever, but more as I was fascinated in the way that financial instruments were flourishing, and especially at speeds that happened. So that really brought me closer to the whole industry, and that's pretty much what got us all together. So that's also where Marek comes in the story. So I think it's maybe a good point, a good moment to pass it on to Marek and allow him
Yeah,
to.
yeah. Thank you, Sebastian. Yeah, my name is Marek. I'm a technical and data science, advisor. If you know that advisor meme, that's me. That's how I relate. And I'm with New Order, which is an incubation DAO, and we help launch innovative DeFi projects. We sort of believe that this is sort of going to be the future of venture studios, right, becoming more decentralized. And the reason, or rather, the way I connect with H2O is, I actually used to be a professor. They used to call me Professor Marek on Twitter. Now I'm regular Marek because I don't teach anymore. But I used to teach data science, and I used to work in computational epidemiology and all kinds of nerdy stuff. And then that's kind of how I got involved in New Orders through this simulation and modeling, token economics, token engineering perspective. Somewhere in there, I also worked at Block Science for a while, which is, I think, one of the premier design studios for it's almost like an architectural firm for token engineering, right? Very, very advanced stuff there. New Order, it is kind of, builds communities of innovators, and Sebastian's actually one of the first, I think, folks. You came from, we met you through the Discord server, right, Sebastian? So it sort of validates our thesis, right? That you build a community of innovators, and they go on to do great things, like Sebastian's doing with H2O. So awesome. Yeah, that's a bit of like a long-winded. Yeah. We also had other successes. Redacted Cartel. Their token's the butterfly token, BTRFLY. They're, I would say, for a project that's only been around for a few months, they're doing remarkably well and winning the curve war. So, just some other stuff that we're involved in besides H2O.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking into New Order. Actually, I think I followed you guys on Twitter beforehand, but I just had never really gotten too involved in it or looked into it too much. And through this project, I think it's super interesting, and I definitely want to get more involved. And I have some questions about that in a second. But I was wondering, Sebastian, you were mentioning like your finance background, and that you were involved in some data before you started H2O. So I wonder, was your like involvement in data, was that more of like a hobby or something you were doing outside of your work, or was that directly
Oh no, that
related
was
to
pretty
what you
much
were doing?
directly related to my work. So as you can understand, digitalization, automation, especially in the financial industries, which are very much based on legacy systems, as we call them, which were introduced back in the 60s. So you can pretty much imagine the environment I was working in. So in order to improve that, we needed to improve our channels of data, as you can understand, when you want to automate or to digitalize, which is absolutely necessary with projects like GDPR and all this stuff where these gateways really needed to be filtered and managed correctly. So that's pretty much where my line of work was. And yeah, as I said, because of the environment and because of how the nature of the industry itself, I became by consequence a very strong advocate, and then became more and more involved in the strategic building of the company.
Very cool. Yeah, so I know that H2O, as itself, it's kind of like not necessarily a stable asset, but it's based on the Reflexer RAI token, and then you guys also work with Ocean Protocol in order to use their token as collateral. And then I also saw on your documentation that you're very involved with New Order Protocol, as Marek was mentioning. So I do have a couple questions about New Order Protocol in terms
Mhm.
of like what level of involvement does New Order Protocol have in H2O and in general with the projects that they work with.
Yeah, Marek, you want to go ahead, or shall I quickly cover
Yeah, well,
my
maybe
thoughts
you
on it?
you answer the H2O part, and then I'll sort of just talk about New Order in general.
Definitely. So in terms of H2O, I think we need to first start by realizing that it takes much more than two developers and a business lead to kind of make a project happen. So you need much more resources uh, in order to go to a final product that is reliable. And I think that's where New Order really bridges the gap for many projects, at least for H2O, where we can really leverage all of their contacts and connections, I mean, it just opens so many doors into the ecosystem, having this established people around you who have all these great contacts and who also have, I mean, amazing insights uh, into how to tackle a specific problem. So I think just having great people around you is essential to build anything in my perspective.
Yeah,
So
it
that's
it's
where the incubation project really comes to the right.
right. There's way more that goes into a project than just the developers or the founding team, and it can be very helpful to have like that whole support system around you. So maybe Merrick, you can go a little bit more into detail on like what makes New Order different than other incubators, or maybe expand a little bit on what Sebastian was saying.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, you know, uh, I think I mentioned this at the top, right? That we're, essentially run as a DAO, right? It's like essentially a venture studio run as a DAO. And, kind of as Sebastian alluded to, blockchain, crypto, DeFi, right? Is very, it's kind of very, paradoxically, right? It's actually kind of very relationship based, right? It's like to kind of get, I think one of the ways that we bring a lot of value is just through like our very wide and deep network, like into, DeFi, crypto layer ones. We're talking to a lot of layer ones, and we do pretty much we assist with everything. We help build projects from the ground up. Basically everything but directly investing, right? So we help people build community. We help find partners, which is very very important, right? Partnerships, projects love the partnership announcements, and they're also very important, right, in terms of finding users, liquidity, capital. Sometimes instead of building something internally, you can partner with someone else to build it. So those things are very important. We've got we know like a lot, very many people in the crypto DeFi space, and we can even help with things like design. you know, my background's in token engineering and token design, so we can help, you know, folks structure their token economics. You know, yeah, like I said, you know, lots of different activities. You know, Sebastian alluded to that go beyond, you know, just fundraising for projects. That's sort of like, you know, I would say, you know, I mean, it's important, right? It's important, but you know, certainly not the only concern by a long shot. So yeah, you know, so on some of our projects, you know, we're kind of very deeply involved in. Others, you know, need help with only certain things, right? Some projects just come to us and they say, you know what, we really need some help with partnerships, and so we're sort of like less involved there. And then some projects, you know, we sort of, you know, bake internally, right, with like a very heavy lift from our side. And that's essentially incubation activities. We are also involved in acceleration of projects, which sort of comes at a later stage, and that's something we're working with Outlier Ventures on. We've launched an accelerator program called Basecamp, and you know, it's actually just kicking off. The program is just kicking off with you know, I think about 8. You know, you'll be hearing about them from us if you follow New Order on Twitter. You're gonna be hearing about like some projects that actually really, before this I was a minute late, so I, you know, the recording's a few minutes late because I was just getting off that you know, the accelerator call, and there's just some really, I think, game-changing projects that are going to be coming out of there in the MetaFi space. But anyway, I'd love to, you know, talk more about H2O. So that's about it from New Order.
No, yeah,
I think
100%.
if I can add just one more thing, because that might maybe not be from Marek's perspective, but from our perspective, it was also very useful to be. I mean, sometimes it's in the small things, but it was very useful to kind of use their existing infrastructure just to organize ourselves and to not have to rely like on cheap free tools, and you know, it cut some cost to kind of be able to do that from the get-go and not wait till the projects further develops to invest on those things. So sometimes it's in the little quality of life of things of a project that also this incubation program has been really helpful.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting because I just felt like through the contributor page on the docs, I thought it was interesting, like that you mentioned New Order. So that's why I just wanted to ask a little bit about it. And I think for other founders, it can be really helpful to also kind of like understand the involvement of an incubator or like partners that they can have in the project. But speaking of partners, I know that H2O basically uses Ocean as its collateral, and that's like through the safes. That's what it uses in order to mint the H2O token. And the Ocean token, which is basically why the H2O data token is called like the data kind of like stable coin in a way, or not necessarily a stable coin, but stable based on like data asset. So I would say, like, what gives a data set value? Like what gives the Ocean token value through the data sets that they have on their platform and on the marketplace?
Yeah, so basically the idea is that like in version 1, you know, we're going to be using the I'm not unmuted. We're going to be using the Ocean token as sort of like a proxy for the value of you know, the wider you know, data token ecosystem, you know, economy. We are sort of like coordinating our launch with the Ocean market sort of relaunch, right? They're launching their V4, and you know, as you know, as this market evolves and, you know, gains, I would say, increasing traction, you know, we're going to be able to use the data tokens as a collateral type themselves. So it's going to be a stable unit of account for this emerging marketplace that itself is going to be backed by data. And what's actually really kind of, I would say, groundbreaking and innovative is that, you know, there's sort of a couple pillars of value in DeFi and crypto, right? So there's fiat backed, you know, stable coins, right? Which are, I would say, you know, are the predominant ones, right? USDT and USDC. You know, and you know, those are sort of, I would say, at risk, like kind of maybe present a systemic risk to DeFi if regulators across the world decide, which, you know, seems to be perhaps the way things are going, to you know, regulate USDC and USDC as banks, that could pose like a sort of a risk to DeFi, right? They might just say, okay, you need to KYC to use DeFi, right? And then there's like algorithmic coins and things like that, like DAI being the most famous of those, right? But then if you look like MakerDAO, right, DAI is actually backed, a majority of it is backed with those fiat-backed stable coins. So, there's also some systemic risk there. So what data presents an uncorrelated type of value, right, that can be used, to sort of build a new pillar of value within DeFi that's sort of uncorrelated to those other types. And also the interesting thing about data is it actually has some intrinsic value, kind of much the way that like things like dog coins like don't necessarily have any intrinsic value. So that's actually, so the real innovation is going to come, when we're able to launch our V2 later this year.
Got it. And so just to clarify, I guess like initially you're going to have the Ocean token as the like initial collateral type, but through the government's process, do you expect people to also add like the specific data set tokens as a possible collateral type that they would accept, or do you see it more as like ecosystem data tokens that would represent the collateral?
Actually, I really like sort of the scenario that you mentioned, right? Is when we migrate to V2, these are more sort of technically oriented questions, so happy to take them. It's going to be much like the migration we envision, right? That it's going to be a lot like the migration from single asset DAI to multi-asset DAI, which we now call DAI, right? I mean, I think the single one might still be around, but usually when you talk about DAI these days, you talk about multi-asset DAI. And so we're investigating a number of I would call them promising approaches to getting to the point where we can back the H2O token itself using data. But we really want to see how like the marketplace unfolds over sort of the rest of this quarter while we build out like some infrastructure and capabilities to really use data tokens as an asset.
Right, and in addition to that, like not all data is built equally, so we have to be kind of careful on the implementation of that. So that's why we go one step at a time in that regard. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah, I was pretty surprised looking at the Ocean's marketplace, how volatile a lot of the data coins were. And of course, I think it depends on probably like the use case for those data tokens, and I'm sure there's also like a level of speculation. But I thought that was like super interesting and not necessarily something that I initially expected. And Sebastian, maybe you have something to add on about like the value, what gives a data set value, like maybe how the fluctuations in price for these data set tokens occur.
Right. I mean, data in itself is a pretty beautiful raw material, let's say. And what's cool about raw materials is, I mean, advantages and disadvantages is that although they're very valuable, they become more and more valuable as they get treated. Like imagine like with oil, it's as you go refining it that it actually gains on value. So the same is true with any raw material, and in this case with data. Is pretty much the same. So when data is, I mean, there is a time factor to it that maybe it doesn't become relevant over time. So data in itself can also be a quite volatile asset, but at the same time, it can be pretty much an appreciative asset in the sense that when handled correctly and when you aggregate different data sets, where it makes sense, of course, because otherwise you go backwards on the quality of your data set. But if done correctly, of course, your data sets can grow in value exponentially as you accrue more data, right? So I think that's pretty much the core of it from my point of view.
Right. And the data set is not just like the raw data itself, it's also the filtration process and the process of selecting the most valuable aspects of these larger data sets, which is really the most valuable part of it. And so I also noticed, like, not only are you guys working with Ocean Protocol initially, but you're also working a little bit with the Reflexer team, because I believe the H2O token is based on some of their logic. So what is your relationship with the Reflexer team? in terms of building H2O and maybe long term, or is it just because you're like kind of forking some of their logic?
Right. So the partnership with Reflexer is pretty much that we are a friendly fork of Reflexer. So we licensed part of their technology to implement this into the H2O protocol. So H2O in itself is equally as RAI, like a non-pegged floating asset. And I mean, our target price is, as you most likely already know, like the golden ratio. That's pretty much the target price the community gathered around and agreed upon. So that's what we're going with. And yeah, we're using the reflexes stabilization mechanics to achieve that. So that's pretty much the extent of the partnership. And of course, as a give back to the Reflexer communities, we also have some LP incentives incoming and some I'm not sure if I can call them airdrops, but something coming for the Reflexer community as a token of appreciation for the great work that they've done with their technology.
And you mentioned like the golden ratio target value. Maybe you could expand a little bit on that because I know reading through the documentation, it does mention that the value of the H2O token can kind of be adjusted over time. There's some mechanics for the governance to determine like if they want more capital inflow, more capital outflow. So kind of like what is the golden ratio value that the community agreed to, and how does that tie into like the controls that governance is going to have?
That's a very broad question. So let me maybe start with the golden ratio. So we put it out a vote to the community to kind of agree on what the initial target price is, because as you can understand, with this type of floating peg that is not one-on-one, let's say pegged to USD or something, or you kind of get to choose what your starting point is, right? So to differentiate from other stable coins in this case, and to just make sure that there was clarity around us not being a pegged asset, right? We I mean, the community sets on the golden ratio, so that's for starters. So and what it basically means is that the target price can move up or down depending on the market conditions, but it would always try to find rebalance around that golden ratio. And I think it was also beautiful from the community to choose that golden ratio, like as a symbolism of equilibrium, let's say. So yeah, that's a bit. I don't know if Marek, you want to maybe add something
Yeah,
about
if I
the
could
PID
add to that, yeah,
controller and
there's
the text.
sure, yeah. I was just you read my mind, right? Yeah. So coming back to what was said earlier, like the specific, piece of technology we licensed from Reflexer was their PID controller implementation, and PID, is a very famous, I would say, and extraordinarily well vetted and used, piece of control systems technology. It stands for proportional integral derivative controller, which sort of uses like, I would say different signals that mean different things. And, this type of controller, keeps airplanes in the air, lands rockets on the moon, all this stuff, right? So, its application to, sort of creating what Reflexer calls like a money god, which is like this automated system that can potentially continue on, sort of in a completely decentralized autonomous manner. That's the ultimate goal. Reflexer, they launched a year ahead of H2O, a little bit more than a year, and they are going through this process of decentralization and ungovernance, right? In fact, right, and so that there's certain parameters, as Sebastian alluded to a minute ago, that that are sort of adjusted in real time, and that's the redemption. That's the redemption rate. So that tries to keep, that is going to, by adjusting this rate to either incentivize people to mint more H2O or less H2O, to sort of keep the supply, right? But with the supply-based mechanism to keep, the price, targeted around this golden ratio. So Reflexer chose a different value. They've been if anyone is interested, they can sort of pull up CoinGecko and take a look at the max sort of hit price history of RAI, right? RAI. And it's done a reasonably good job of staying around $3, despite they're backed with Ether, right? Much the way we are backed with Ocean token. And even though the price of ETH has fluctuated wildly since RAI launched, it's done a really good job of staying around $3 there. So yeah, that in a nutshell is sheds a little bit more light on kind of the mechanics, right, of H2O.
Right. And so whenever users want to mint H2O, they need to put the Ocean tokens into a safe. And then I noticed that in a safe, they have either they have some sort of borrowing fee, but in some cases it can also turn positive. So how would the process work if someone wanted to put some Ocean tokens in a safe and mint H2O? How would they be able to determine whether they're going to be paying like a negative, or if they're going to be getting paid in order to borrow that H2O, or if they're going to have to pay to borrow the H2O?
Yeah. So that's one of those. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's actually one of those sort of system parameters that isn't necessarily going to be automatic, right? Over time, like in a sort of like a longer time scale, governance can sort of adjust, let's say, the bias of of the protocol to sort of expand or contract. So yeah, as you suggested, we're going to be launching with, I would say, like a fairly basic dashboard that I think the vast majority of users, first of all, are going to be sort of just like holding H2O, maybe staking it. There's we didn't get into it yet, but there's going to be a whole bunch of partnerships that we're announcing. I think we announced one yesterday, didn't we, Sebastian?
I was muted. Yes, we did.
Okay. Yeah. Of sort of like, ecosystem partners where H2O is going to be used. So like the vast majority of users won't even necessarily touch the let's call it the deep protocol part, right, which is used in minting H2O, creating safes, as you said. It's a lot like what people do when considering minting DAI, right, using ETH, right? So people like individual users are gonna basically make a decision, these are sort of, I would say, call them more like professional DeFi users, right, than kind of end users. And we're going to be upgrading the UI over time. We're planning an advanced dashboard that's going to include, I would say, deeper analytics to take a look at like different protocol trends and things like that, to be able to make a kind of better informed decision. So I would say, like, for people that are looking to get into it, I'm glad you sort of raised this, right? I think that researching researching the history of RAI, right, and sort of following the developments that happened there over the last year, and how people have sort of decided whether to mint RAI or not, and also, like, we're very much analogous to MakerDAO as well. So I think those are probably good precedents, right? Let's call them for this system.
Yeah, I think that Marek already put it kind of nicely in, as I prevented the situation earlier before we talked. When it comes down to this engineering terms, I kind of always go down the rabbit hole and butcher their terminology. So no, I totally agree, and I think what isn't important about the protocol in itself, and I think this is again a very different rabbit hole, is that we are centering really around data economy as such, right? Like, I don't think I need to explain you, but for all listeners, like, it always comes with new markets that emerge, that there is a lot of volatility, but as time goes on, there is an absolute need for a stable unit of account, a medium of exchange, and that's pretty much at the core of what H2O is delivering to the ecosystem.
I would just close in saying that I guess for like the power users, right, and like the people that are, I would say, on the bleeding technical edge, we've got a Git book up there that, like, I think describes, like, a lot of the inner workings of the protocol. And if it's not already, the code's going to be open source soon. So, folks can definitely will be able to do a deep dive ahead of launch. I do want to add that we were recently passed the audit by Halborn.
Oh yeah.
So I think what really speaks to the stability of the robustness of the system is the empirical evidence, right, that Reflexer RAI has been pretty much dependably functioning for over a year now, right? So that's more than a lot of protocols could say, I would say.
Right.
And they have been extremely stable also over that period of time. I think the experiment has worked very well, and it's a proven method. So we're happy to work with their mechanics. That's for sure.
Right. It's amazing to have a project that's already basically tested the logic for that period of time, and then you can kind of leverage that for yourself. And I thought what Marek mentioned earlier, about how like most users who use DAI, like they never really touch any of the mechanisms in terms of minting DAI or anything. That's more for like the power users. And then most people will just go on a DEX and maybe use DAI as a stable coin for some of their trades, but they're never really going to look at any of the super technical side of it. So I thought that was a really good point, because I guess that's how you guys see a lot of users using H2O as well. And so on the topic of like kind of power users and governance, I was wondering,
Yes.
or something that I really liked about the project, and specifically the governance, was kind of this like ungovernance process. And I noticed RAI does this as well. So why is governance minimization important?
I think it's also a bit the idea of the unstoppable code, right? It's a bit to have a self-sustained protocol that can live out there and serve the community as it would. But to be honest, we're still far away from that. I mean, H2O in itself, we still, as we alluded to earlier, have a V2 upcoming, where a lot of change need to happen, and we're still very early in the day. So although it's an aspect of the protocol, and I think it's a beautiful idea to have that, it's still far away in the world for us now.
Yeah,
Can't
good
speak
good
for
good
Ryan,
good
as
observation. Yeah, yeah. I
go
was
ahead,
just saying, good
please.
observation, Sebastian. Yeah, because most projects go through this process of decentralization, right? Another way that maybe when you automate things or freeze things that can't be governed anymore, that's what you sort of rightly called ungovernance.
Right.
And Reflexer, after a year in, right, like they're starting to go through that process. Certainly, there's different phases in the life cycle of a project. All projects start off centralized, right? If you look at the, regardless of what you look at, I mean, you can look at sort of the great granddaddy of them all, like Bitcoin. When it launched, like there was just a few people mining Bitcoin at that point, right? And it's gotten, I would say, arguably more decentralized over time, right? I guess that's a whole other podcast on its own. But so we're going to be, yeah, as Sebastian mentioned, during those early days, right? Like things are naturally kind of more centralized, and while the project is needs to go through like a major version upgrade to realize the potential, certainly there will be a lot of governance via DAO. Like it's not going to be necessarily a centralized thing of like Sebastian calling the shots for everything, right? But like the DAO will at first manage those things, much like MakerDAO. The DAO part of MakerDAO, right, help with that process from a single asset DAI to multi-asset DAI. So certainly over time, much like Reflexer, there's going to be sort of I would say governance sort of over the very long term, right? If you look at over the course of like years and decades, and certainly we're building this protocol to last. A governance over time kind of could become like an attack vector, right? Over like a very long period of time. So that's I think the wisdom, as you mentioned, of ungoverning over time as much as possible. Glad you brought that up. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think a lot of projects, I don't necessarily think there's like one completely like agreed upon way about going of governance in general. I know some projects kind of want to maximize governance, but in my opinion, I believe that governance, minimization is a much better route to take, because instead of having a bunch of like parameters or something, that can be changed over time. That's kind of showing that the base system is not just completely like robust on its own without anyone touching it.
Hmm.
And so I think that's like one of the big benefits of having like governance minimization over time and trying to minimize what the governance has control of as the protocol matures and as the smart contracts are on chain for longer. Um, so I would say like what problems, I know you guys touched on it a little bit, but like what problems would you say increased governance control has um, in comparison with governance minimization?
I think first of all, especially coming from the traditional finance background, I would say governance increase slows slows everything down significantly to start with, and complicates a lot of the process. So I'm really against uh, governance increase. I just think it is like an unnecessary complication of
Yeah.
matters, I think.
So maybe I can opine on that as well, Sebastian.
Yeah, go ahead,
If
please.
if I may, yeah. So like I spent a bit of time at block science for jumping into new order, and there I had the, I would say, extreme I guess privilege of working alongside visionaries like Michael Zargam over there, and got to help out some. Well, I won't name them on this podcast, but some like of the top 100 projects in the world with their token economics and engineering as a result. And what we sort of realized there was that there's protocols have to be able to, DeFi protocols, blockchain protocols on some level have to be able to sort of sense something about the world, or sense themselves, if you will, right, to kind of know what to do. So if we allude back to Bitcoin, right, Bitcoin has a way of sensing the hash rate, right, that's being used to back Bitcoin and adjust the difficulty um, in response to that, right? And that's sort of called, that's sort of, I would say like a certain type of control loop, certain type of control system that's sort of maybe more, number one, more autonomous, right? Because it's fairly like enshrined into Bitcoin, right? How to assess difficulty, right? They use like SHA-256 and proof of work and all these things. And then over sort of the longer term, right, to sort of for the protocol to sort of sense its way in the world strategically, right, like big, sort of like a sort of like a longer control loop of how do we respond, how does a protocol respond to changes in the environment, in the ecosystem. For protocol, it's not a layer one protocol, right? H2O is not a layer one protocol, it's a DeFi protocol. For that protocol to respond to changes in the layer one ecosystem, right? Like for example, on Ethereum, fees fluctuate wildly, right? And now there's this rise of layer twos on Ethereum, right? Which and then also Ethereum's own scaling and development roadmap. Like those are all, I would say, kind of like uncertainties that an completely autonomous system would be able to sort of consider those things. So what governance becomes like through like a DAO-like mechanism, right? Is it effectively acts as a sensor for these issues that come up that are sort of like maybe not just on chain, right? Like on chain, you've got no idea if you're assessing difficulty and using price and these things. You still have no idea about like what the scaling roadmap of that blockchain is, right? Because your application is sort of living in that blockchain. It's really the job of governance to steer a protocol through those sort of longer term issues, right? And as things kind of really, let's call it ossify, right, in terms of like what's going on with layer ones, what's going on in the multi-chain world, what's going on with this protocol in general, ecosystem, like how's the data tokens ecosystem evolving, as those things really fall into place, right, and they're not changing, then you've mentioned on governance a few times and how you think it's awesome. I think it's awesome too, right? And once those things are really settled and like everybody's sure, like, okay, this is run for 5 years, we think it's going to run at least for another 25, 100 years, whatever. Those parameters can be sort of frozen, and we can go through that ungovernance process. but it clearly takes time, right? As you pointed out, right? It clearly takes time. Reflexer, a year in is just starting on that process, and then we've got a major version upgrade to go between now and then. So we'll get there, right? We'll get there. The H2O ecosystem that's sort of run by this going to be run through the Poseidon governance token, as the sort of the token for voting in the DAO will navigate those upcoming changes.
Yeah, I think that was a really good overview on governance and kind of like the outlook for the governance process in general. And I know earlier you mentioned like partnerships in terms of other projects that
Right.
are going to be working with H2O, or ways that projects can integrate H2O into their own ecosystem. I know, I'm not sure if this was the partnership specifically that you were talking about that you just announced, but I think it was the partnership with DataX. Um,
Correct.
so how can partnerships, or sorry, how can protocols take advantage of H2O, and how can they work with the token?
Yeah, definitely. So to take a step at that, I think a lot of the success of H2O and of stable assets by itself comes from the utility. So it just serves as a stable unit to support trading, staking, and different DeFi applications. And in this case specifically, it's kind of unlocking the value of data. So that being said, that also comes from a big part with. So when we speak partnerships, maybe we can first take a step back and look at Ocean. Because for me, Ocean is absolutely fascinating. So it's not only the Ocean protocol that is doing great things in terms of democratization of data, but also they have this whole ecosystem around them, right? Where tons of developers, and I believe 80 plus teams are now like building on the Ocean ecosystem, or at least around their technology. So that's where H2O comes in, and where we basically leverage also the whole ecosystem, and in this case DataX specifically. um, yeah, Manan, sorry if I'm wrong, but I apologize already in advance to the DataX people, but I believe their whole concept is they have like two products basically. So on the one hand we have TradeX, which is a data DEX, right? And on the other hand, we have StakeX, which allows people to stake their data tokens, right? That all together is part of the data police, if I got that correctly. So that's already, they're also building some micro ecosystem of DataFi, as we like to call it. And the role of H2O, and that also I think answers the role that H2O can play in general in this ecosystem is serve as kind of the default stable asset of the data economy, and in this case also of DataX, by obviously eliminating the volatility and allowing for greater user access to these platforms. And with DataX specifically, we also will introduce the ability for users to mint H2O, but then from the Data Police app, so straight from DataX, which again allows another point of minting and redemption of H2O, so expanding our own ecosystem. And H2O will also support in liquidity pools for trading and staking of these data tokens, as alluded earlier. So together with Ocean and also with DataX, but also with new emerging data markets, we're really building, let's say, the Web3 data economy and bridging the gap into DeFi. In this case, by bringing a stable asset that can be used for that.
Right, and getting a use case for a stable coin is always like that's the most difficult part, right? You need a user base to have adoption over that stable coin. And I think having, or stable asset, not necessarily specifically like a pegged stable coin, but I think having like that initial partnership with Ocean is huge, and then already having other projects that potentially want to integrate H2O also shows that there's real demand for this specific like niche in the market. And I think it can be really interesting to see how if more niche specific stable assets kind of come up after this. I think the data market is probably like it's a really good niche example of this. But I wonder like what other markets could come up in the future for stable assets that are specifically directed at different types of markets. So I wonder where do you see H2O data like by the end of the year, and kind of like what stage are you guys in the launch process?
So yeah, for the launch, we are looking at launching now the 27th. So everything we're pretty much in the last stretch to launch the protocol. And yeah, throughout, I mean, for the rest of the year, we're looking at, as Marek alluded earlier, and as we said, to bring H2O V2, where we integrate valuable data tokens as a form of collateral. In addition to that, now, I mean, immediately at launch, we will also provide liquidity incentives for several LP pools, and obviously, as the ecosystem grows, we will be wrapping into different EVM networks, doing some UI improvements, and as Marek already said, we will improve on the analytics aspect of the protocol to deliver a more user-friendly and a better experience. We're also looking at Curve and Convex. As you might know, we also are closely tied with Redacted, so I don't want to leak too much alpha on that topic, but we have something cooking there. So that's definitely that. And as Marek also said, we're on the road to V2. We want to look at things like data indexes. That's where the partnership with DataX might come into play, or maybe on another level. Who knows? I mean, I don't want to disclose too much, but those things are at least in our horizon. And yeah, it all depends how the industry grows, because if we look back, for example, yeah, go ahead.
Can I jump in there? I like where you're
Jump.
going there, right? Because I just also wanted to respond, like, I mean, like today, like it's fairly niche, right? But like, I think recently McKinsey and Co came out with a report that like was just really like eye popping for me. They were saying that data exchange, data as an asset class, right, is going to be like a 2 to 3 billion, no, not billion, not the B word, $1 trillion market. It's going to be a multi-trillion dollar market, in the coming, like, this decade, basically, right? So this is like a massive opportunity, and something that like at one point, like crypto was sort of niche, right? And now there's double-digit adoption in places, right? So we would definitely think of this as the future, and H2O is sort of like, I would say, an asymmetric bet on the opportunities in data and DeFi.
Right, exactly what I wanted to say. Basically, is that if we look back.
Oh, sorry, Sebastian. I'm gonna stop.
No problem. So yeah, basically, exactly that, Marek. So if you go back, I mean, you can only see how data has evolved into previous technologies, and I can only see this growth. So as today, it's a very undervalued market, but I think it has several reasons. But that again is for maybe for another podcast. But for several reasons, one of them being that it's a very consolidated market where only a handful of players are actually benefiting of the value of data as of today. But it doesn't mean that it's a small market. It's actually, as Marek said, a $1 trillion market, several $1 trillion markets, and quickly evolving. And as technology evolves and as Web3 evolves, we clearly see a path forward where this actually be the standard for data to be on chain and to kind of be secure and transit through those roads. So that's where we stand.
The future of H2O sounds super exciting with all of those potential upcoming partnerships and all the things you guys are working on behind the scenes, and also the future of the data industry. I think it's really interesting because actually I've been getting like more recently into supply chain stuff, and data is a huge part of that as well. And there are many. I think in many different industries, there's kind of an overlap of this upcoming wave of data that's going to be like super important in the future. So I think it's definitely a huge industry that's going to be expanding as we move into the future. So something that we like to ask every founder or team members that come on our podcast is like, what advice do you have for founders who are maybe looking to launch their own project that you wish you would have known before you started your project? Maybe like unexpected hurdles, things that have been really successful. Like, what advice would you give to founders that you wish you would have known when you first started H2O Data?
Definitely don't be afraid to reach out to others. As Marek pointed out, it's a very the crypto industry in itself is an industry of people, I would say, and being well connected often just takes reaching out to certain people and making it happen. So I wouldn't be too shy when you want to launch your product. And whatever you're doing, surround yourself with smart people who actually, I mean, like Marek himself, right? So surround yourself with smart people.
You
Don't be
flatter
shy.
me, sir.
Don't be shy. Get out there, connect with the right people, and things will happen. Things will come. And if you're interested in building something around data, I mean, don't be shy to reach out to us, and we can definitely have a good chat. Or if you need and resources or an incubation, I mean, there are several players, but I would definitely advocate for New Order. And yeah, just get out there and get going. That's what I would advise. What would you advise, Marek?
Yeah, my kind of observations are like, there's sort of like this expression, right? It's like give, get, right? Like, so like, um, to add to what Sebastian said, industry is very open. Like crypto Twitter itself is like actually amazing, right? It's like you could tweet at like a literal billionaire, and they'll like tweet back to you, right? Because it's crypto Twitter, right? You just, call out somebody's bags, call out some billionaires' bags, and just watch them respond to you, right? And that's actually really interesting about this space, right? At the same time, like sometimes you get like kind of like lucky, and like an example I just mentioned, right? Lucky, and you get you get to contact somebody. Oftentimes, coming back to like give, get. Oftentimes, like the people that sort of get recognized and get opportunities in decentralized communities, sort of like show themselves to be someone who's like not hopping into the server one day and being like, admin, where's admin? I need to talk to the founders, sort of this stuff. And it's like oftentimes like maybe you are already like rightly famous and well connected, but a lot of the time, there's literally hundreds of people kind of joining every day and asking for things, right? Making demands and stuff like that. So what I find is the successful people in a community, they're in the Discord, they're answering questions, they're being helpful, they're participating. Like a lot of projects nowadays, like New Order has, I would say, out there, like I think it's among the top, let's say, contributor programs. Maybe some would laugh to hear that, right? But I mean, we're told that we're some of the more active communities on platforms like Bework, and people kind of like I would say like this, the people that sort of get the most attention, that right to the top, are people that are active in those contributor reward programs. And I think it's like coming back to what Sebastian said, it is all relationship based, but you kind of have to build relationships, right? Relationships don't come out of nowhere, and they don't kind of come overnight. Is those people are accessible, but it's sort of sometimes it's a matter of like building those relationships. That's sort of maybe what I've noticed over the.
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely the case. And that, I mean, just to end on that, but something that I read this week was also like in crypto, we don't build customers, we build community. And I think that pretty much puts it down. So you need to get out there, be vocal, and you'll find the right help in the
Right.
crypto space. That's for sure.
I completely agree. I think the contributor base to a project is one of the most important things, and really getting those like high quality community members, or becoming really like intimately involved with the project is one of the most valuable and important things you can do. So maybe, as you mentioned, like connections are the most important thing. Maybe you can talk. We can end on how people can get in contact with H2O Data. Maybe if they want to partner, maybe if they want to contribute a little bit more. What are the best places to learn more about H2O Data?
H2O data. So if you want to learn on the specifics of H2O itself, I would definitely recommend the Git book. Like everything is in there. Now, if you want to find me or somebody of the team, I would recommend Discord, as we're all kind of tight knit into Discord and not so much into Telegram. And we're a small team, so managing both is quite challenging. So if you want to reach out to us, definitely Discord and Twitter if you just want to stay kind of up to date, or Telegram if you prefer that. But so yeah, to get in touch, Discord, to follow up, Mirror, Twitter, Telegram. Yeah, that
Amazing.
would be pretty much it.
And we'll put links to all of those different platforms in the description of the podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you guys for coming on. If you're interested in following VentureNode for future episodes, make sure to follow us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, every podcasting platform that you listen on. Thank you guys so much for coming on. I think we had a really amazing episode.
Thanks for having us.